everyone, how are you today? So I'm currently in my classroom, our classroom, working hard on getting things nice and tidy and clean for us when we return to school. So our history topic for this term is going to be Vikings, and I was going to read you the story There's a Viking in My Bed by Jeremy Strong. So I thought having my YouTube channel would be an excellent opportunity for me to still read it to you. Okay. Have you got your pillow ready? Let's go. Chapter 1, Crash Landing. Through the mist came the creak of many oars. Now and then there was a splash. The grey mist swirled and slid over the flat grey sea, but not a sign could be seen of the boats, only the steady slap of oars and a few low curses. When a dark shadow moved within the mist, growing blacker as it came nearer, until the great wooden hulk of a Viking warboat emerged, trailing wisps of fog along its sides. 20 oars bit into the water, and 40 Viking warriors strained over the heavy poles. "Never have I seen fog like this," hissed the leader. He was a tall Dane with a huge moustache and beard fiery red. "There is something I do not like about it." He cast a glance at the lookout, standing up by the great dragon head prow. "Is there no sign of the fleet? Where are the other boats?" The lookout sucked one finger and held it up as if to judge the wind direction. He stared into the mist, took off his helmet, and pulled out both ears like radar scanners. His ears were big and red. The Viking leader cursed. "Sigurd is an idiot. Why do we use a fool for a lookout?" Beside him, Tostig laughed. "It's quite simple, Ulrich. Sigurd can't row or cook. What else is there for him to do? You know what happened the last time he was at the oars. We ended up going round in a circle for almost an hour. And when he was cook, he boiled up all our best meat in a pot of seawater. Ugh! At least he's safe up there." Ulrich Blacktooth spat. "Look at him, holding out his ears. What a fool!" He shouted forward. "What can you see, Sigurd?" "There's a lot of mist today," answered the lookout. No, wait, there's something else. I can see something else through the mist." Ulrich Blacktooth gripped the mask. Had they found the rest of the war party at last? "What is it? What can you see?" "Wait a minute, the mist is clearing. Yes, I can see it quite clearly now." "What is it? What is it?" bellowed Ulrich impatiently. "There's water below, Ulrich. I can see water. It's the sea." Ulrich Blacktooth shut his eyes and banged his head several times against the ship's mast. "Tostig," he hissed, "that man will be the death of all of us. Why are we cursed with such a fool?" Tostig was snorting through his nose, a sure sign that he was losing his temper. Temper losing was something that Tostig was very good at. He did it quite often, and practice makes perfect. Now he drew his sword, which he had named Heart Splitter, and strode forward. In a moment he was beside the lookout. "Sigurd, of course you can see the sea. We are on a boat. We are at sea." Tostig spoke as if he wanted each word to hit Sigurd like a hammer. "Now, Sigurd, if you wish to stay alive, do something useful. Get yourself up that dragon's head, sit on top, and don't say a word until you see the English coast. Do you hear?" So saying, Tostig thrust his sword, the pointed end, very close to Sigurd's backside. Sigurd gave a jump and scuttled up the prow until he was right on the dragon's head. From there he turned and looked back at Tostig. "I was only trying to help," he complained. Tostig grunted and returned to Ulrich, while Sigurd sighed and tried very hard to see through all the mist that surrounded them. He was bored and tired. He had been on lookout duty for days. For some strange reason, nobody would let him row. Sigurd had always thought rowing was his best subject. The boat was part of a large Viking raiding fleet, headed for England. They had been at sea for 7 days. The mist had been with them for the last 24 hours. It was a creepy, evil mist, making everyone nervous and jumpy. Somehow they had become separated from the rest of the fleet. Now they were drifting, they knew not where. Sigurd strained his eyes to see through the swirling greyness. He pricked up his ears. What was that? Could he hear something? There was a splashing of the oars, but there was something else. Perhaps the sound of breakers. Sigurd perched as far forward as possible, lying across the dragon's nose. He thought of shouting to Ulrig and Tostig, but they would only be cross. Sigurd stared and stared. The mist seemed even thicker, but the noise was louder now. It was breakers, surely. That could only mean one thing. They were close to land, maybe too close. Breakers meant a coastline, and then that could mean rocks. He must tell Ulrig they were close to land at last. Ulrig, Tostig, there's... At that moment, there was a sickening crunch, and the longship ran headlong into low rocks. Sigurd was catapulted into the clammy English sea. The boat shuddered and stopped. Ulrig picked himself up from the deck and shouted to the men, "Reverse! Quick! Hard astern! Go back! Turn about! Full speed backwards!" 20 oars plunged into the sea, and the Vikings strained every muscle to move their boat off the rocks. Slowly, the great wooden keel slid back. Slowly, the sea caught hold of the longship and pulled her clear. "Back! Back!" Ulrig bellowed as the warboat gained speed. "Where's that idiot of a lookout?" Tostig glanced at the dragon's head. "Sorry to report, Ulrig. I think he went overboard when we hit the rocks." Ulrig was about to shout "man overboard," but stopped himself just in time. "Sigurd, overboard? What a relief!" Ulrig smiled. "Full speed ahead! Muffled oars!" he commanded, and the longship slid silently away into the misty North Sea. Sigurd was not happy. The English sea was wet and cold. This was something he had always suspected, and he was disappointed to find it true. Why hadn't they gone to the south of France for a raid? The sea was warm and blue there. Why did they have to come to grotty old Britain? He pulled a long piece of seaweed from beneath his helmet and waded ashore. Sigurd stood on the beach. Cold water ran out of his helmet and down his spine. It trickled down his legs and filled his boots. It was not a nice feeling. He walked forward a few steps, slipped on a dead jellyfish, and fell flat on his back in a rock pool. A large crab took an angry swipe at one of his big red ears, then marched away. "Ow!" Sigurd scrambled to his feet. "This isn't my lucky day," he muttered. "Well, there's only one thing to do. If the others are not here to raid a village, I shall have to raid one by myself." He drew his trusty and rusty sword, which he had named Nose Picker, and set off across the beach. It did not take long to find the path up to the cliffs. Indeed, Sigurd was surprised to find good steps cut into the rock face. He moved with all the stealth of a Viking raider, or so he thought. Here came the great warrior, eyes ablaze, sword drawn, soggy feet squelching in sodden boots. The mist did not make things easier. It still clung to almost everything, and there was little that Sigurd could see. At last he reached the top of the cliffs, and he followed the well-worn path ahead. He felt there were buildings nearby before he actually saw them. The path became hard beneath his feet. It was made of something he had never seen before. Sigurd's heart beat faster. A cat ran yowling across his feet. Sigurd took a swipe with Nose Picker and almost chopped off his toes. Now he really could see houses. They were huge, much larger than he expected. They had hard walls, and in the window spaces there was something he had never seen before. It was dark and shiny. Sigurd peered more closely, suddenly saw a fierce warrior glaring back at him. "Ah!" yelled Sigurd, and thrust forward with Nose Picker. There was a shattering sound, and the enemy was gone. Sigurd leapt backwards. What kind of magic was this? The mist was clearing all the time, and Sigurd began to see such strange things. He could not even begin to describe them. There were no words in his language to do so. Things with wheels, yes, round wheels, but such small wheels, and certainly not made of wood. They were thick and black and had peculiar shaped things on top. Suddenly, 2 bright eyes appeared, huge white eyes glaring at him from the mist. There was a strange clinking sound. The eyes started forward. They stopped. They started again. They were getting closer and closer. Sigurd drew back into the darkness of a doorway, his shoulders pressed against something small and round. Bing bong, bing bong, bing bong. Every time he moved, the same weird sound went off in his left ear. The bright eyes came closer still. A misty shape moved behind them, carrying something that clinked. His eyes whirred and moved away. Sigurd began to breathe more easily. Bing bong, bing bong. The door behind him began to open. Sigurd sprang to life and was off like a hare. He ran and ran wherever the hard concrete paths took him. At one moment he saw those bright eyes again. They were moving much faster, coming straight at him and roaring angrily. Sigurd threw himself down a side path, and one of those odd shapes on wheels rushed by. Sigurd stood there panting. He must find somewhere safe to hide. He staggered up the path, his heart pounding, then all at once he stopped. Right in front of him was a big picture of a portrait of himself. There were the moustache and beard. There were the horned helmet and handsome nose. There was Nosepicker held aloft. It was himself, no question. Sigurd the Viking smiled and nodded. There was some strange lettering beneath which did not make sense, but Sigurd didn't care. Surely this was his home. He would be safe here at the sign of the Viking. He grinned up at the picture, mounted the steps, opened the door and went inside. Outside, the Viking on the sign almost appeared to wink. The writing underneath said, "The Viking Hotel. Every modern comfort. Managers, Mr. and Mrs. Ellis. Rooms available now." That's the end of chapter 1. I'm going to carry on and read chapter 2, double booking. By 8 o'clock in the morning, the mist had quite cleared, and few people even realised it had been there earlier. The summer sun was now warming the pavements, and the sign outside the Viking Hotel swung a little on squeaky hinges. The Viking warrior did not seem quite so splendid in full sunlight. It was easy to see that the paint was peeling in many places. In fact, the warrior looked rather the worse for wear, as did the rest of the Viking Hotel. Paint was flaking from the window frames, plants were wilting in flower troughs, dust and litter had blown up against the corners of the walls and stayed there. Mr. Ellis fetched a broom and sighed. It was the same every day. He didn't know where the dirt came from, but it kept coming. He had washed the front windows only 2 days ago, and already they were smeary. It was no wonder there were hardly any guests at the hotel. It was the height of the summer season. The place should be full to bursting, but out of the 12 guest rooms, only 3 were booked. Mr. Ellis swept the front steps clean and went back inside. "Are you children up yet?" he called up the stairs. There was a distant reply of thumping feet. He went to help his wife get breakfast ready and lay the tables in the dining room. Suddenly the staircase was filled with thunder. It shook and rattled as if an entire North American buffalo herd had decided to migrate down it. Zoe and Tim appeared breathless at the kitchen door. "What's the matter, Mum?" Zoe asked, wondering why her mother was standing so still and pale. Mrs. Ellis blinked. "Oh, nothing. I just thought someone had fallen down the stairs. For a moment, just a moment, I was seriously worried. I might have known it was you two getting up." "What's for breakfast?" asked Tim, grabbing a banana from one of his plates. "Put it back. That's for the Ambrose boy, and you know how fussy he is. I don't know why his parents let him get away with it. You can have breakfast when you've laid the tables." Their father pointed to the dining room. "Don't forget the small glasses for fruit juice." It did not take long to set the tables with so few guests. As soon as they were finished, Zoe and Tim went back to the kitchen, where Mr. Ellis was frying some eggs for them. He asked what they were planning to do all day. Zoe looked across at Tim and shrugged. "There is some shopping that needs doing," suggested Mrs. Ellis. "Don't forget we have a new guest arriving this morning, Mrs. Tibblethwaite." "Mrs. what?" squeaked Tim. "Tibblethwaite." "Fiddleplate," Tim repeated, his small tongue struggling to get in 3 different directions at once. "Oh dear," smiled Mrs. Ellis. "You'd better get it right before she arrives. Try again. Tibblethwaite. Mrs. Tiddlefate. Tim jumped up with delight. There, I've got it, Mrs. Piddlegate. Oh, Tim, sighed Zoe. Come on, let's go and get the shopping. Mrs. Ellis gave her daughter a list and asked her to see if she could get some sense into Tim before the new guest arrived. Mrs. Ellis watched them set off and then turned to his wife. I don't suppose he'll get it right. He's only 5, and it is a difficult name. Perhaps Mrs. Tibblethwaite won't mind. Just think, we'll have 4 rooms booked. Is her room ready? Asked Mrs. Ellis. I did it last night. Honestly, Penny, I don't know what we're going to do. We'll be completely broke soon. Nobody comes because the place looks like a dump, so we never make enough money to do it up again. It's a trap. Penny Ellis slipped her arms around her husband's waist and hugged him. Don't worry. Something will turn up. You're right. Something has turned up. Mrs. Tibblethwaite, and she's early. You finish off the breakfast. I'll see to her. The latest guest was standing on the front step, looking at the hotel sign with some suspicion. She was short, rather heavily built lady, with a large hat and even larger suitcase. Good morning, cried Mr. Ellis, flashing his best smile. You must be Mrs. Tibblethwaite. You've arrived early. Good morning, replied the lady stonily. I always arrive early. You must be the Viking Hotel. I'm Mr. Ellis. Did you have a good journey? No. The train was late. Somebody smoked in a non-smoking compartment, so I pulled the alarm cord. The train stopped, and I was fined £50 because that's what they said. It wasn't an emergency. I told them it most certainly was an emergency if I was going to be forced to die of lung cancer, and then the taxi couldn't find this place at all. I expect the driver took you to the Viking Cafe, said Mr. Ellis. They often make that mistake. But Mrs. Tibblethwaite was hardly paying any attention to him. We went to the Viking Cafe, the Viking Restaurant, the Viking's Delight, the Viking Chinese Takeaway, and the Viking Burger Bar. Well, you're here now, smiled Mr. Ellis, seizing the heavy suitcase. Follow me, and I'll show you to your room. Just why are there so many Viking places around here? Asked Mrs. Tibblethwaite, stomping up the stairs behind Mr. Ellis. Ah, well, over 1,000 years ago, Floppy was a favourite target for the Viking raiders from Denmark. There are lots of Viking relics around here, and we have a Viking festival at the end of every summer. Now, the bathroom is at the end of the corridor. You've got a lovely view of the sea from room 4. The other guests are at breakfast now. Would you like to join them? No, thank you. I ate on the train. I don't know what it was. It arrived on a plate all wrapped up. I suppose they were afraid it might spread germs if it wasn't kept wrapped. Anyhow, I'm not hungry. What time is lunch? That's at 1 o'clock. You'll see all the hotel details on the notice in your room. Mr. Ellis opened the door to room 4 and pushed the suitcase inside. Then he hurried back downstairs to help with the breakfasts. What's she like? Asked Mrs. Ellis under her breath as they passed between the tables, pouring coffee and serving extra toast. She'll eat you for dinner. 1 gulp and you'll be gone. Oh dear. All I need now is a difficult guest, as the Ambroses aren't bad enough. At that moment there was a loud cry from the top of the stairs. Mr. Ellis! Mr. Ellis! I say, Mr. Ellis! Penny grinned at her husband. Oh, Mr. Ellis, I think that's your favourite guest. Mr. Ellis, do go and see what the matter is. I'll give you Mr. Ellis, he growled. He put the coffee pot down and hurried to the staircase. Mr. Ellis, cried Mrs. Tibblethwaite, clutching the stair rail with one hand. Her face was white and trembling. Mr. Ellis took the stairs 2 at a time. Whatever is the matter? Mr. Ellis, there's a Viking in my bed. What on earth do you mean? Mrs. Tibblethwaite suddenly stopped shaking, drew herself up to her full, small height, and fixed Mr. Ellis with 2 extraordinarily dagger-like eyes. I mean, Mr. Ellis, that there is a Viking in my bed. What do you think I mean? If I say there is a Viking in my bed, I mean there is a Viking in my bed. Why don't you come and look for yourself? She grabbed Mr. Ellis by one arm and hauled him off down the corridor. She kicked open the bedroom door and pushed Mr. Ellis in front of her. He entered the room carefully and went across to the bed. No, there was nothing. Certainly the covers were all mucked up as if someone had slept there, but there was no sign of a soul. I think you must be dreaming, Mrs. Tibblethwaite. I was not dreaming, Mr. Ellis. There was a Viking in my bed. Good heavens, man, do you think I don't know a Viking when I see one? He still had his helmet on, and his boots. I insist that you search the room. Mr. Ellis groaned. He got down on his hands and knees and looked beneath the bed. He pulled back the curtains and shouted, "Boo!" "There's no need to act the fool," said Mrs. Tibblethwaite coldly. "There's nobody here," said Mr. Ellis, crossing to the wardrobe and pulling open the double doors. A million coat hangers seemed to burst from the wardrobe, and a monster sprang yelling into the room, all arms and legs and hair. His black tangled beard had bits of seaweed hanging from it. His eyes glittered from beneath huge shaggy eyebrows and a dented two-horned helmet. Sigurd snatched a nose picker from the scabbard, glaring at the two strange creatures in front of him. "Rah!" he snarled, swishing nose picker through the air and slicing off a bit of curtain. "Rah!" Mr. Ellis simply stared, quite stupefied. His brain had gone into shock. He could not move his tongue or lips. No sound would come from his throat. His feet felt as if they had been nailed to the floor. His arms were like lead sausage rolls. Mrs. Tibblethwaite poked him. "There, you see? I told you there was a Viking in my bed. Now, if this is some kind of welcome committee, I don't think very much of it. And if it's some kind of joke, it isn't very funny. Don't just stand there, Mr. Ellis. Do something." Mr. Ellis did do something. He fainted. Sigurd gave a loud laugh and stepped towards Mrs. Tibblethwaite. "Oh, no, you don't, you overgrown hairpiece. Take that, and that." She began to beat the Viking with her handbag, almost knocking his helmet off. Sigurd yelped, decided he had had enough, and ran from the room. He plunged down the stairs and almost fell headlong into the dining room, stopping himself just in time. He stood at the bottom step, panting and brandishing nose picker, while 7 very startled hotel guests put down their toast and coffee and stared back at him. That's the end of chapter 2. Tomorrow I'll read chapter 3, and then you've got your 3 chapters for the week to listen to, ready for the next 3 chapters next week. Okay, so I hope you are all getting on with your home learning and you're working hard, you're enjoying the sunshine if you can, and I hope you're staying safe. Bye.